Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, friends and enemies. My name is Jānis Rinkulis VIII. Today we continue going through Arnold Schoenberg's Fundamentals of Musical Composition. At first, I planned this video to be about a musical form unit called the sentence. But while reading chapters 4 through 7, I ran into a problem. In chapter 5, Schoenberg explains how to write the beginning of a sentence. But already in chapter 6 he seems to forget that he had started talking about the sentence at all, and suddenly begins teaching how to write the beginning of a period. By chapter 7 one would expect to finally hear how to finish a sentence, but fate was not on our side. Schoenberg first decides to explain how to finish a period, and only in chapter 8 does he finally explain how to finish a sentence. For that reason, in today's presentation, I've decided to tear chapter 5 out of the book and throw it away. In the meantime, a few remarks from what used to be chapter 4. Overall, Schoenberg is concerned with logic and the intelligibility of musical material. Logic is impossible without repetition of the material, yet repetition without variation inevitably leads to monotony and drowsiness in the listener. At the same time, one has to be careful not to overdo the variation.
There are means by which the tendency toward too rapid development, which is often the consequence of disproportionate variety, can be controlled. Delimitation, subdivision, and simple repetition are the most useful.
Intelligibility in music seems to be impossible without repetition. While repetition without variation can easily produce monotony, juxtaposition of distantly related elements can easily degenerate into nonsense, especially if unifying elements are omitted. Only so much variation as character, length, and tempo required should be admitted. A complete musical idea or theme is customarily articulated as a period or a sentence. These structures usually appear in classical music as parts of larger forms, for example A in A-B-A-1 form, but occasionally are independent, for example in strophic songs. They center around a tonic and they have a definite ending. Only a small percentage of all classical themes can be classified as periods. However, according to Schoenberg, the practice of writing periods is a convenient way to become acquainted with many technical problems. The construction of the beginning determines the construction of the continuation. The period differs from the sentence in postponement of the repetition. The first phrase is not repeated immediately, but united with more remote, contrasting motive forms to constitute the first half of the period, the antecedent. After this contrast, repetition cannot be longer postponed without endangering comprehensibility. Thus, the second half, the consequent, is constructed as a kind of repetition of the antecedent. In composing periods, a practice form will be useful. It should consist of 8 measures, divided into an antecedent and consequent of 4 measures, each by a caesura in the 4th measure. In great majority of cases, the antecedent ends in dominant, usually approached through a half or a full cadence, but sometimes through a mere interchange of tonica and dominant. Antecedents which end in tonica also exist. The consequent usually ends in tonica, dominant, or third, major and minor, with a full cadence. Although the consequent should be in part a repetition of the antecedent, the cadence, at least, will have to be different, even if it leads to the same degree. Generally, 1 or 2 measures of the beginning will be retained, sometimes with more or less variation. Analysis of periods from Beethoven's piano sonatas. In second movement of Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 1, the antecedent ends in dominant, measure 4, the consequent in tonica in measure 8. The harmony of the antecedent is a mere interchange of tonica and dominant. The consequent ends with a full cadence. The upbeat, which is twice varied, and the feminine ending in measure 2, 4, and 8 are unifying characteristics of this melody. It is significant that the melodic approach to climax in measure 6 is supported by more frequent changes of the harmony and the increasing use of small notes. The downward movement after the climax is also significant. In second movement of second Beethoven's Piano Sonata, the caesura on dominant is reinforced by a half cadence in measure 4. Observe the contrast between the first and second phrases. The consequent deviates harmonically in measure 6, ending with a full cadence in dominant, measure 8. The consequent is a modified repetition of the antecedent, made necessary by remote motive forms in measure 3 to 4. If the period is a complete piece, for example, children's songs, it must end usually with a perfect authentic cadence and tonica. If it is a part of a larger form, it may end on tonica, dominant or third, major or minor. An unchanged and complete repetition is very rare. Even in the very simple cases of examples 50, B, C, and E, at least the last measure is modified. Usually, the introduction of a full cadence requires earlier changes. In examples 45A, 46G, and 50A, the deviation of the harmony occurs in the 7th measure. Variety needs no justification, it is a merit in itself, but some variations in the melody are involuntary results of the changed harmonic construction, particularly of the cadence. The melody parallels the changes in the harmony, obeying the tendency of the smallest notes, like an accelerando, or on the contrary, contradicting the tendency by employing longer notes, like a ritardando. Alright, based on what we've discussed so far, here are a few periods that I've wrote myself. Well, in today's epilogue you will be observing Daniel, because after editing the main part of this video, I've been struck by a sudden wave of laziness. Today we covered everything essential about the period, and also touched problems of over-variation, as well as the opposite issue, stagnation in the development of musical material. That said, I wish you a happy new year. Subscribe to the channel immediately if you're interested in seeing me once every 2 weeks. And as for me, I'm going to get some sleep.